in the class. Next week we begin our student presentations. So those of you that are the first week, and if you haven't prepared your student presentation, if you have any questions or concerns, see me after the presentation tonight, or send me an email and I'll follow up about your 3 to 5 minute presentation. So just like we have all semester, we're switching things up again. Instead of having a single speaker or somebody on Zoom or a big panel, tonight we have 2 designers, furniture designers, that are in town, joining us from Baltimore and Michigan. Were recommended to us by 2 alumni that are actually joining us here tonight. I'll introduce them later. I'd like to introduce Justin Beitzel and Fernando Ramirez. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having us. It's our first time in Long Beach for sure, and we're really excited to kind of be part of the Duncan Lecture Series, and appreciate Max for kind of getting this all set up, and Eric and Jordan for kind of inviting us as well. Yeah, it's been really great. So yeah, we're excited to share our project here today. We're going to talk a lot about kind of our studio and how we formed it, and also this project we're calling Okaterra. And you'll see how kind of all of our previous experiences led up to this project, and we're kind of trying to understand where it's going from here. So I think it'll be fun, and we're excited to take your questions at the end, for sure.
Yeah, and pretty much what Okaterra is asking is, can we go beyond sustainability? So can we think beyond sustainability? And we're calling that, I don't know how many people have heard of regenerative, but can the future of furniture regenerate pretty much? So our design studio is Common Object, founded by both of us. And where it kind of started was actually kind of working together at a company, and then actually the talks that just happen outside that company about our values and what we really cherish. And we both end up going our separate ways. I moved on first and started working for some other mid-sized companies. I did some audio, things like that. And Justin, steadfast.
Yeah, I worked for a company called Steelcase, which a lot of furniture here is Steelcase. I don't know the rest of you.
Coalesce,
yeah, this is Coalesce, who's owned by
Steelcase.
Steelcase. So one of the biggest furniture manufacturers in the world around office furniture, and we had a connection, I think, at Steelcase because my background, I started as an engineer. As kind of where I began my college progress. I did that for 2 years and realized in my 3rd year that I'm a designer, I'm not an engineer. There was a lot of things that told me that, but and then I grew up in kind of middle of nowhere in kind of farm country, and I met Fernando at college about 10 years ago, and you have a totally different background.
Yeah, totally different. So I was studying environmental design before we met, and I was working on that a little bit as when we met for industrial design at school. And my background was, I'm actually from Chicago, so it was really interesting. I think we found each other intriguing because we were so different, and I think that, you know, us being together, that thinking of our backgrounds and the way we look at community and what that means, we're kind of saying the same thing. It's just very different backgrounds. So when we founded Common Object, like I said, it was over all these conversations, but when we decided to do it, it was really saying, all right, if we're gonna start a studio together, what does that really mean? And we wanted to start to create our values around what that studio was gonna be. And what our tagline kind of is designing toward thriving. And what that really means is how can we empower communities on one end, and then how can we help organizations take steps towards sustainability? So when we take on these projects, what we're really doing, we're using our value as like a lens in which we filter these products. So as we take on every project, we always come back to these values to help guide us. Not all things are sustainable, not all things are community. But when we look at these projects, we ask ourselves, do they embody our values, and how do we move towards our goals as a studio? So these are a few products that we've worked on in the past, and this is just more to show that our breadth of work. So we work with bigger companies, and we work with small companies, startups, things like that, places where we can have more influence. I think that's been part of what we really like when we approach a company, and we ask ourselves, can we have, if we're trying to make change within a company, how much influence do we actually have with them? So you guys see we've been everywhere. We go to NeoCon, which is the contract furniture conference, which I know some people we hang out with there sometimes that are in the audience. But yeah, that's just one part, just traditional product development with companies. Another part is community. So we spend a lot of our time actually connecting with the communities we're in. Justin just had a parklet last week that he helped a company with to kind of get the neighborhood connecting, and me, like in Grand Rapids, I do a lot with the city and the park systems to go to like these underserved areas and not just bring design to them, but really understand them and try to facilitate kind of connection within there. How do people connect back to their own communities? So as we work on projects, we also ask ourselves often, how does this impact community? What does this mean to community? As we design furniture, okay? But we also say like, all right, but how do people connect to this furniture, and how is it impacting? What are the different parts that are impacting where it's being made? So we get a lot of these great questions by connecting to those values and using that once again as a filtration system. The other thing we do in our practice is really, we focus a lot on connection points and materiality. For a long time, I think, when we were within companies, we would try to preach this sustainability, this change in sustainability, these steps, and we found ourselves frustrated often. And we didn't have the time or the resources to do it, or we'd have to do it on our own time. So we said, when we start a practice, we're gonna wanna create those connection points. We wanna understand materials. We wanna understand how to divert waste. We wanna understand that. So we have kind of like an untraditional client list sometimes. So we work with people who are in recycling. We work with people who are, like I said, diverting waste or taking in donations, and we're trying to figure out, where does this really go? So it's just about being really honest with ourselves, with the client, and really understanding what materials mean, and what's up and coming.
And that's not a chicken nugget up there.
That's not a chicken nugget.
No, right. We'll talk about that more.
People often think it is though. But so a few ways we kind of do that. One is connecting dots and sustainability. So you could see here, even with, this was a NeoCon release called Saddle this year. And this is a company that, they're a smaller company. It's hard to invest in those steps towards sustainability, right? But we could bring in things that are very easy for us to do, things that we're very skilled at, like doing assessments. So we'll go into their factory and kind of assess their waste, assess their systems in which things work, and then just see it's just investigating. It's seeing, are there parts in there that we can make sense of to help them push them towards a different system that moves towards sustainability. Another thing is just exploring materials for them and bringing in like low-hanging fruit. So not everyone has the money to bring new materials, and even if it's a material that's done, it's hard to bring that anyways. So what we'll do often is say like, hey, we have these that we think are probably going to be a next step towards sustainability. Can we start to do some experiments on them? Do you guys want to do that? Because they have that resource, and then we have that connection, so we're able to bring that in.
I think also with that, a lot of times the work we do that we're proud of, sometimes it doesn't see the light of day, right? Because it's not necessarily reflective in the product that, like, we really wanted this. We had visions for this to be ultra sustainable and be able to be fully disassemblable. And that didn't happen with this product. It was something we pushed for. But the learnings that the company made during that were really big, and we learned about a lot of their waste streams and how they could manage that in different ways. So it's kind of hard to talk about sometimes, your impact, and I think that's kind of been our goal, is how to understand that better.
Yeah, and I think it lands more on us, right? It's a frustration with self more than it is the company. But yeah, I think he's right. Like, you take those wins, right? If you could move them a little closer to sustainability, that's great. So this is another one. This is a smaller company. What we were learning here is like we were creating a glassware line for a startup. And what we really wanted to do, glassware in America is like not really, it's very hard to find suppliers for it. So we pushed ourselves to kind of find some other avenues, but it has to be avenues that if we're going from the ground up, we want it to be rooted in sustainability. So even working with like a hot shop in Philly, this all women owned hot shop that does all hand blown glass, and you know, pairing that with like recycled materials and really building the story. So starting from the beginning and saying like, hey, we're going to build a story around a product. We're going to build a brand around that product. So even things like that, like just helping shape some of those stories, and really getting into areas that we're not used to. Like, we deal with supply chain. We're not often in charge of supply chain, right? And then this is another one. So this is a big recycling company in Michigan. Michigan's very, very big on recycling. They get a lot done over there. It's not recycling sometimes, right? It's not huge numbers, but Michigan does it a little better. And we work with a company out there that does a lot of aluminum recycling. So like going in there into their company, investigating, trying to figure out, you know, can we create product for them that is more high value. So I think just even that, so we're going in and we're kind of looking at a system, right? Yeah, we're designing product, but it's really looking at the whole system in which it's done, and like, how do we create, if we have this dynamic story, how do we create higher value product for that? So I think through all this, kind of like Justin was saying, I think we often ask ourselves like, are we going far enough? And I think our mission, once again, that we're trying to connect everything to, it has us asking like this question at the end, because of that frustration, not being able to push it far enough, is, you know, what is our role as designers in all of it? And how do we create the most impact if we are making products? Because we don't often get to do that. So that really led to, you know, one question leads to more questions, right? Always. That's what we learn in school. But we really started to ask ourselves is can we really design product that embodies like our mission? It really takes that. We're using that as a lens, but what happens when we don't have a box anymore? When we take ourselves absolutely out of that box.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of I think as designers, as you work through your career, right, as we all work through our career, you realize how constrained the world is, and those constraints are really great, and they help us push forward.
Yeah.
But I think this question of like, what if we had like no constraints from a client necessarily? What could we create from that really embodies and shows kind of a vision for this? So.
And I think to add to that as well, I think we wanted to embody our mission, but I also think we started to ask ourselves, you know, can we keep pushing? Can we push it beyond kind of what we've been doing as well?
Yeah, and so just like we were kind of in all those companies, all those explorations, we were looking kind of outside of design as far as we were starting to look at supply chains and realizing that that's a big impact, looking at community, right, and realizing that's a huge impact. Yeah. And we also said for this project, the Okaterra, which we're going to be kind of really diving into here in a second, we wanted to look outside of kind of our traditional industries and what our traditional, for a model that exemplifies what we're going for. Yeah. And so we stumbled upon, especially with my like farming background, and I have a lot of friends who are really into, I don't know if I'd call them like hippie farmers but they're really into like sustainable agriculture as like just a practice that they do. And as I talk to them, I realize like, oh, there's this like whole field out here called like permaculture and regenerative farming that I never heard about, right? Like I've seen traditional agriculture, and I grew up around, you know, big spraying of fields and you know, monoculture and dry soil. And with this idea of regenerative agriculture, you know, the traditional, or I should say the like current modern industrial system of farming does a lot to like to compete with nature, right? You're constantly trying to push as much of that natural out to create a monoculture of corn or a monoculture of beans or whatever that is. Where regenerative agriculture, they really work to try to say, how do we partner with nature to actually like enhance it and create a better system from it. So you can see on the right here, they have a lot of cover cropping, which protects the soil. It increases biodiversity in the soil, which also creates really amazing attributes that store water, and so you're having a lot less runoff and a lot less pollution into the bay or into wherever. So there's all these amazing things that just by kind of changing your outlook of working with that natural system, you can all of a sudden start to really have these amazing results. And so we took that as kind of a model, and we said, can the act of producing something give back more than it takes, right? Like I think we're often confronted with this idea of sustainability as the goal, right? Of, hey, we want to do something that doesn't create bad stuff. But this idea of regeneratives kind of saying, can we make this thing better than when we left it or when we got there? So, yeah, and we're furniture designers, so why not focus on furniture? So we said, can the future of furniture be regenerative? It was a question that we posed at the beginning of the project, and it's something that we're answering still. So just know that that's like something that we're still working through. It's an experiment. And this is it. Okaterra is the name of our furniture brand that we launched at ICFF recently. And we'll kind of take you through the journey of that and how we work through it and some of the learnings of it, kind of over the next few slides here. So I love this slide because it kind of shows this idea of sustainability, and I think it's something we all care about. Just some of us more than others, and that's okay. But the idea of regenerative is moving from like our conventional, which most of the product we design falls into a conventional kind of system where you're negatively impacting the planet or the communities that we have, and you're trying to reduce that as much as you can to get to sustainable, right? Where this idea of regenerative is not only taking into account the environment and how we're treating the environment, but also the social impact that we have on it. Can we actually create restorative work through the different kind of ways that we're producing? So we love this kind of as like a way to look at the work we're doing, and it's kind of, it takes our designer guilt a little bit. I love designer guilt. And it's like, how do we make that a kind of a positive impact? So with that, sorry, there's a lot of questions in here, but I think that they're all important. Like the questions that we ask are how we kind of find answers. So we realized that to do this, we really had to start from the bottom up. So how do we design a chair that gives back at every stage of its life? So to be regenerative, we have to look at every single impact. You'll hear of like life cycle analysis as a key term in any kind of product that you design, or especially in buildings as well, right? So you want to understand that, and so we had to do that, but instead of just starting from this, the product material side, we went to the beginning and started in the soil. So this is our criteria that we laid out for what we saw as how you can create a regenerative product or a regenerative system. And so the key one here is starting with the soil. So we wanted whatever we make to build the soil, to sequester carbon into that soil, and to increase biodiversity. So that meant that it needed to be a bio-based design, right? It had to be grown in the earth, and it had to use practices that were kind of in this regenerative farming field, essentially. We also wanted to support farmers. If you don't know, farmers don't make a lot of money, right, in general. So like, how do you support these farmers who are visionary now and creating these sustainable practices and make them want to do that more? We wanted to grow kind of circular systems locally. So that includes manufacturing, and how do you bring this all together in a local circular system? And then the end, which I think is where most of the focus of sustainability is kind of in our current world. We focus on how does this product end its life? Is it recycled? Does it emit chemicals? But take back, right. There's so many different ways to do that. But for us, it's one piece of it. So we wanted all of this to end as nutrients for the earth. So that meant we constrained ourselves to not use any plastics, no harmful chemicals, and to just be nutrients at the end of its life cycle.
Yeah, and I think a good note to make on this as well is, you know, there's a lot of great materials coming, right? And I think we often think of you know, science can save us, right? We kind of wanted to, we're not scientists, so for starters, but I think what we wanted to do also was something we knew we could do now, something we could implement now. And that kind of that bio-based part, that part where it could return to earth without a take-back program, it could return to earth, you know, without being recycled. I think that was a really important part for us.
Yeah, and so this was our criteria, right? We all start with criteria for our products, right? And this was a big one for us. And we had to, like, from the bottom up, kind of build this to figure out how to accomplish it.
Yeah, and like really ask how we're going to do this. So that's when Justin had the big idea. He's like, well, let's go start looking at farmland. Let's start a farm. And I was like, yeah, I'm not starting a farm with you. I'm not going to do. I don't. Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm from the city. I'm not. I can barely keep my succulent alive. So it's like I'm not starting a farm. But that was good because it opened up the dialogue, right? Then what can we do?
Yeah, and so like I was looking at farmland to buy, and I think the part of that was like we couldn't find people who wanted to grow in this way. It was hard to find the supply chain that was growing these materials. And so Fernando said, he was like, listen, like, we're designers, we're not farmers, and like, we can find these people. They've got to be out there. So Okaterra, the premise of it is we find farmers who are growing in these like really visionary ways that are supporting their earth and their local environment. We process that material into materials that we can use and create furniture from those materials. So that's kind of what we add there. And part of that building the local system, we challenged ourselves also to say, hey, can we stay within 150 miles of one location? Like all of this can be grown in one area. And so our studio is in Baltimore, and we said, let's start here. Let's see what happens if because a lot of the carbon emissions is from a lot of shipping and a lot of weight that happens in that. So it was kind of a challenge, right? Can we do this and do it effectively? So we'll get into some of the nitty gritty here. Our big challenge was finding farmers, right, and finding materials. When you think of furniture, you think of soft things. Generally, you're sitting on some very flexible kind of hard things, but a lot of furniture has like a nice cushion to it. So we wanted to make sure to bring that into what we did. So we focused first on this idea of regenerative wool, and we created our own fabric from this wool, and also waste wool infill from it. So you can.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of this was he kind of touched on it, but it was working with people who don't usually trust outsiders. So we, you know, Okaterra for a long time was us just nurturing relationships, which is kind of what designers do, though, right? It's like what we do with clients. We go in and we try to create a relationship, and then we kind of we assess what they have, what their problems are, ways we can help. So it wasn't all that different than what we do already.
Yeah, and it was really about finding farmers that wanted to kind of work with us and could trust us. So here on the left, you'll see our farm, our partner in PA. And I'll just explain, if you go to the next slide, I'll explain a little bit about like what regenerative, when you think of that, is just in general. So like most of our wool is from New Zealand and from Australia, there's some in Asia, but it's almost all white wool, right? That's like the kind that's accepted here. And the wool that's grown, like the sheep that are good in Baltimore are not merino white sheep. It's hardy, these sheep over on the right, which are blue or Shetland sheep. And you can see they come in all different colors. Like that's kind of the beauty of nature, right? There's so many different colors, and it's not a monocrop of that we're kind of traditionally use. And so this idea of using that wool was really important to us, but we didn't have a way to process it. So if you haven't heard of Fiber Shed, has anyone heard of that yet here? It's a great one to look up if you're into product design. They started here in Northern California, and it's really about all that stuff that went overseas. Now we can't really grow, wool here because we can't process it here. So Fiber Shed is about kind of bringing those small local textiles back. And so I look at that as like as a model for even what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think we were really inspired with them as a whole as well. Like this idea of creating, I mean, to be regenerative, it has to be regional in a way, if we're going to get to that. So with Fiber Shed, creating a regional, Fiber Shed, it's a network. It's creating networks, and then if you order over here, then you're creating a network there. So we were really inspired by that. So that was really like for Okaterra, early on, seeing that. Not only does it align with us, but also it's a model that we know is starting. So it's like, okay, I think we may be able to do something with that.
Yeah. So we got this wool from our farmer, and we had no clue what to do with it. I'm not into textiles at all, but I am now after 2 years of doing this. So actually processed it from the raw wool, went to a local mill to card it, clean it, put it into bats, and then made it into a textile, which is there on the right. You can see this like brown fuzzy felt that we came out with, and this is just mixing those two, the brown wool and the white wool there, right? So something that we found is that traditionally a lot of the brown wool is just thrown out, like they burn it or they dump it outside. And so you'll see here in the next slide, we found like over 200,000 tons of wool is just thrown away every year. And so that's because it's just not usable in the way that we typically use wool, right? Which is a white wool that's perfect length, and you dye it in this procedure, and you spin it in this exact way. And so there's so much wool that's thrown out. We said, well, how can we use this as another way, right? These sheep and these farmers are sequestering carbon into this wool, and it's just getting burned or thrown away. So we use most of our wool as filler instead of using foam, right? That was a big part of our process, was how do we find a way to create non-foam based furniture? It's ubiquitous in all of furniture, right? And so that was a big part of our challenge. So waste wool is a big part of it. And then we have this soft piece, right, that we know that we need. We also need structure. Wood can be very sustainable. It can be very not sustainable as like you dig into it, right? So with us, we said, what's the most sustainable wood that we can use? And we found Baltimore fallen lumber is what we think is, for our region, the most sustainable way to do this. So it's wood that would fell in the city, and normally that's sent to a chipper or sent to landfill. And so we get that wood and actually process it with a partner, and we can put a carbon footprint of how much we saved from that lumber. There, kind of big part of it was how do we not only use this great material, but do we bring in local makers and local suppliers to make that happen, and I'll talk about that in a second here. But yeah, it's just massive problem in every city. Los Angeles has it too. I'm sure you've heard of that. There's so much wood waste. I think they did a study recently of the amount of if we would just use the usable lumber in our cities, it would be like taking half the cars off the road in the U.S. every year. Like that's what you could do just by using that lumber that falls in the city. So, but the problem is there's no one who's gathering it up except for some like artisans, right? Who's typically, which is great, but we're kind of saying, how do you start to scale that and find partners to do that as well?
Yep.
And then part of our partnership is working with community, right? We talk about community. How does that help build this? So we work with a nonprofit wood shop in Baltimore, and they actually train people in the trades of running CNC, of doing woodwork, and bring a lot of that into downtown Baltimore, which is really depressed as far as like the amount of jobs that we have there for people of like this kind of skill set. So it's a really beautiful story of what we were able to do there. And then we also have other materials like that they all need to be bio-based. So hemp is a big one that's coming back to the U.S. as we kind of grow that. It's really slow. And then we're also looking at these more innovative materials like this chicken nugget looking thing here. That's a piece of raw natural rubber. So it comes off from the rubber tree, and then it's processed right into this. You can see here, this is a bio-based, completely plastic-free leather. So that's something that was really important to us. How do we kind of cut the emissions that go into a lot of our leathers and textiles? And this was one of them by partnering with this company called NFW in Peoria, Illinois.
Yeah.
So to say all that, we haven't even picked up our pencils yet, right? to start designing anything.
But we have our lineup, right? We kind of know
Yeah.
where we could head a little bit.
Right. It was. We knew we needed structure. We needed softness. We needed springiness. And we needed it all to be bio-based. So we have these materials here, and so that's where we started to say, okay, here's our palette of in our criteria. We have all this lined up here. How do we start pushing into the next stage of this, which is traditional product design, right? So from our early ugly sketches, thinking through how do we make details that don't require glue joints, or that could, we don't have to staple these pieces together in some way that you couldn't get it apart.
Yeah, no metal fasteners, nothing. Like our criteria also was like, if this thing sits in the woods, how long would it take to decompose? If it falls off a ship, right? The fish can nibble on it,
Right.
and they'll be okay. So that was kind of guiding that as well. We had to think through those things.
Yeah, and it was a great, really fun exercise. We're just going to kind of breeze through that because it's, I think you all get that. You understand the iterations that you go through to try to get to an end criteria. And it's really, really tough. Like this exploration over here that Fiona's doing is around how do you create softness and springiness and it was so many exercises in changing that kind of paradigm that we're used to using foam for.
And then something more traditional on the left, just testing ergonomics and kind of seeing how it's going to be used and if it's comfortable.
Yeah. And just lots of prototypes. These are just a few of them that got built and kind of look like chairs, like the end chairs, but
It's 2x4s.
yeah, exactly.
Together.
I'm sure you're very familiar with it.
Yeah. So where we ended up landing was our first two chairs out. So the Okaterra, this more wide stance chair that really utilizes like they both utilize the infill, but has the wool infill, it has the wool covering, and then it has the hemp suspension. And then we have the Terra Lounge on the bottom, which was a collaboration with NFW, the rubber material we were talking about, and really trying to figure out, how do we create something new? They've never done any kind of upholstery. So common object side, we were actually developing some of that for upholstery. So as we were playing with it, we're looking at these properties, and that's what kind of led us to like some of these attributes that we pulled out for each chair. So one of the first things was we had to learn was how do we work with natural imperfections when we were messing with the wood, playing with the wood. You know, it had a lot of imperfections because it is fallen lumber. So we wanted to have these really generous proportions to almost frame some of that imperfection and kind of celebrate it in a different way. When we were thinking of Okaterra as a whole, we're like, well, we want it to feel crafted. We knew we needed a premium cost for it, but we also knew, you know, we're industrial designers. We know automation, so we knew we had to kind of bring those two closer together. So yeah, just pretty much taking that and trying to also no glue or no fasteners, right? So we had to think about like how is that kind of crafted. And then going back into this as a whole, right? With easy attachment for like serviceability. So the frame's going to last a while, right? The wool might not. So how do we make a product that the user can easily change out? And you can see we're taking cues from even fashion a little bit and using like toggles the way I attach it. But you could take that right out and take off the backrest. The same with the seat. So using this rope detail as suspension, so using that hemp, because wool we got some comfort out of it, right? We're working through that infill, that springiness, but also we needed something, it didn't feel like foam, right? So we wanted to create like a little bit of suspension, find a way to give the user something that feels a little more familiar, a little more bounce. And then once again, like embracing variation. We talk about it in wood, but it's also true in wool, right? We need to tell a story of that. Every piece is unique. You know, every piece is beautiful in its own way. And like you could know the name of the sheep that your wool came off of if you like, right? So we want to we want to connect the buyer to that as well. And then kind of what Justin talked about a little bit as well is turning that waste wool into value. So I said we go and evaluate. When we go to companies, we often go in and evaluate. We did the same with farmers. We asked them where their pain points are, much like a lot of designers do. And that waste wool for us felt like it was a lot of opportunity. It was in a really beautiful like regenerative agriculture story. That waste wool was a really big pain point. So that's like really what drove a lot of like our interest. We spent a lot of time just trying to figure out how to use that. With the Terra Lounge, you know, we had such a beautiful material. NFW did such a great job with the material. You know, we talk about like expression meets simplicity. So a really simple frame. We are moving towards craft. At the same time, it still is automation. The more craft, the more expensive. So how do we kind of pair, you know, these really dynamic moments like these large rods with something really simple like this more squared frame? You know, and then with NFW, you know, just understanding those material attributes, you know, what can it do? So it's rubber, right? So it has a little bit, unlike our wool, right? It has a little bit of bounce, has a little bit give back. So, you know, with the thicker versions of it, which were more commonly used, say like in shoes, we use that as like a sling suspension for underneath. With the thinner one, you know, we could work through these really fun details. And once again, we were like looking at fashion. I think New York Fashion Week was happening, so we were like, I think we were just looking at it a lot. But you know, we could do these really beautiful like ruching details, and you know, we bought I think a ruching foot, is that the proper term? That creates it. But then we were playing with this hemp and running it through as an attachment method. And it's like, actually, we could kind of create some of that if we just give this more material. So even pushing some of those details.
I think traditionally, like a lot of the ruching is made with an elastic band inside of it, and so we wanted to stay away from that. And it was a big challenge to say, like, how do we gather material in a way that doesn't involve plastic? And so this was, you know, lots of trial and error in upholstery, which is not necessarily our expertise from like we're not expert upholsterers, but I think as like we love exploration, and so that's something that we just bring into each piece of that we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, like we were saying earlier about serviceability, with this one, it was a lot about, designing for disassembly. Like, so, how does this thing completely come apart? As you see here, all the components, how do they work together in a way where if you did need to take this apart at end of life, it's really simple. And back to that serviceability, right? If they did need to replace a sling or a cushion or something, we have those really understood details, right? This inset rod that, like, you could see, like, oh, if I move this rod, this sling pulls right through.
Yeah, and so like, we show all this, and it's like a very specific 2 products, right, that
Yeah.
came out of that. And we're still working on others, and we're still working on how do we scale. Like we're scaling this like as we speak, right? We have some in production, and we're working with our partners to kind of build this up and become a bigger thing. But that's going to take time, like and resources to get there.
And we knew we wanted to take some of these learnings and say, like, okay, well, this is what Okaterra is, but what does this mean for companies? Like, how do we did this as a case study, right? We didn't start this as a business, but we found a business in there. So we wanted to find these learnings that we can kind of take to other companies as well.
Yeah. So I think from that we've tried to say, how do we implement this into the rest of our practice, right? And this could apply to kind of anything, I think, from no matter how sustainable the product is from the beginning. Like, there's ways to pull into some of these learnings. So I think the first one that we had was just embracing variation. I think as designers, we often want so much control over the output, right? It's innate, I think, in us to want to say, to go through the details and want every single one to be the same every single time. I think that's important as designers to have that kind of intuition to make it the same for every user. But then there's this like really sticking point about like nature has tons of variation, right? In everything that we do, and often we're trying to shape it and pull it into a very specific thing. So how do we embrace the variations found in nature, and then how do we how is our drive for uniformity created monocultures, just like in a monoculture of corn, right? How is that created a monoculture in the supply chain that we had? And so it's a big question for us, just like the wool. Then the other one is embracing place. So believe it or not, like this region is much more different than the Baltimore region. There's so many different things that grow here that are not grown in Baltimore. We walked around the city, and just looking at the gardens, right? It's so different. And so I think something we're challenging ourselves is when we're designing something for a specific company or a specific product that's going to be created somewhere, how does the things around that, the bioregion, affect how we're designing it? What is the social implications of it? What are the environmental needs that could be improved by the production of the product that we're making? And this is a huge one. Embracing history in a modern context. So if you look at all the things we did, there's nothing really new there. This is a lot of things we've been making furniture for thousands of years without plastics, right? And without metals. So a lot of what we did was going to museums and trying to understand how furniture was traditionally made. There's also like the regenerative agriculture is this new term, but it's a practice from indigenous cultures for millennia. It's not anything new. So how do we look to those as we kind of move forward into all of our product design and all of our developments that we do with nature? Designing for growth. This is about when we talk to these. We've shared this presentation with a bunch of like huge furniture companies, right? And they see this and they say, "That's great, but like this won't work for us because we're so big. We need to be able to at a hat or at the flip of a switch produce 10,000 units of something, and we can't do that with the farmers that we have. So how do we start something, just something that can grow with these farmers and grow with the material development that we have, with the cost? We know that this is an expensive chair. We have to meet the material where it's at, and then grow that to be even more cost effective in the future. Design for disassembly. Fernando talked a lot about this, but yeah, how do we let that disassembly method kind of, you can let that drive some really beautiful details, and I think that's something that I as a designer can get really excited about when I'm like, oh, this is my criteria. I need to design this to be disassembled. There's a specific button here or a specific way that this latches that creates this beautiful detail that I can see it as a really awful constraint or as a really fun constraint. So I think trying to do that in all of our products, plastic or not. And then I think this is kind of the biggest one for us that we see as the biggest impact. When we started this, the beginning of the presentation, we asked like, where does design stop? Like, what is, what are we doing as designers? And I think we realized that the biggest impact we can have is by doing this exploration of materiality and sustainability and supply chain at the beginning of our projects before they even kick off. So we often say if it's not in the marketing brief, it won't be in the end product. So if sustainability isn't in your marketing brief that you get as a designer, it's not going to end up, it's not a criteria, it's not going to end up there. The same with supply chain. Oftentimes these are set up years in advance before the product is out. So you have to kind of have this as an exploration that you do at the beginning and understand what your criteria is to kind of set that up. So just as kind of a recap on the project of where we've landed, we are still working on like scaling this, but as a system, right, we've created this furniture that starts from the soil and is sequestering carbon, increasing the biodiversity of the area around Baltimore. We're supporting right now like 4 farmers who are there and are slowly selling us materials as we grow. We're this local circular economy in the Baltimore area, from the ones that are creating like sustainable products, sustainable materials, and hopefully servicing them as they go. And then the furniture itself could be something that like pig falls off a boat, the fish would love it, right? That's kind of what right now I have one of these cushions sitting on my porch, and the birds just come and like pick apart the wool and the hemp, and they're making nests out of it, right? And that's okay, like it's fine that that's happening. It's a beautiful thing, and it gives me some like, I don't know, encouragement when I see that nature using kind of the things that we've created. And that's Okaterra. That's kind of our exploration, and it's been a big part of our studio over the last 2 years, something like that. And we're using it as a way to kind of rethink how we approach design, but then also as a way to kind of communicate to other companies how we can all kind of work towards this and shift our studio a bit into this thinking. But I think it's something that we see as an exploration at the moment, and we also are still doing like very traditional product design work, right? At the same time, so it's not like that stops either. It's kind of all happening at once.
Yeah, it's just taking that step that we wanted to take those first steps and kind of do a case study around it. Yeah, it's grown. Like I said, I think we started off as an experiment, but it's kind of grown into something more. So we're excited about it.
Other than design, and maybe we'll kind of leave this outside of the furniture industry, what career would both of you most like to attempt or try?
Like together or?
No, individually. What would you?
Probably, I'd like to try farming to see what happens. I don't know.
Oh, mine's so much more boring. I dream of like boring jobs sometimes. I'm like, man, I would love to like mop the floor today. Like, just to do that. But no, I always say I think there's so many things I would love to do. I have a weird dream of like maybe like just a shop owner. Maybe that's my retirement plan, right? I just like hang out in a shop and have regulars that come in and say hi.
What kind of shop are you thinking?
I mean, probably always like some kind of furniture shop because I'm so used to furniture. I love the idea of curation as well.
Right.
You know, I think it'd be really fun to curate, like me not create the beautiful things, but me just curate the beautiful things. I know how long it takes, so I'm like, oh, I'd love just to curate.
Right. Well, now on the opposite, I think we know what career you would not want to do, but maybe we'll expand on that. What career would be the least likely that you would want to attempt?
Hmm. Yeah, actually, I mean, since we've done this, I will say, farmland used to, you know, I would drive fast through farmland because I'm like, oh, let me get out of here. It was just unfamiliar to me. And since then, I think like I've come around. I do, like, all kidding aside, like sometimes I'm like, it would be nice to have land now, right? It would be nice to learn how to, well, we see like the change happening. It's like, it would be nice for me to have control over my own food system as well, you know? So yeah, just to go back to that real quick. Yeah, I think I'm more into farming than I ever was probably, even though I haven't done it yet.
But you don't want to do it.
I probably still don't want to do it. So yeah, something maybe as we develop this more. But no, I think anything too mundane, right? Like I don't want to insult the industry, but like accounting, I just would be horrible at that. I'm not very organized. I just that'd probably be mine for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought about this for a while too, and it's like, I don't have a specific industry, but yeah, anything that I kind of get into too much of that doesn't have freedom to explore, I think I could find joy in a lot of things, and there's probably even accounting. I don't know. Maybe there's exploration there that I don't know of, right? But that one's
Forensic accounting?
yeah, forensic. I don't know. Like, I think there's creativity that comes out of every field. But yeah, I think my skill set is definitely not in like curation. I would say something I've tried to do like interior design with, and you'll laugh at me. Like, I am not made for that in any way. Like, even I'm very good at product design, but I do not think I could do interiors, which is a very strange
He
one.
struggles.
You're better at the things in the space than the space itself.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I love creating the space and understanding it once it's there, but I have a hard time thinking through it like he does.
That's interesting, even within design, that there are things that maybe don't speak to you.
Yeah, I think maybe it's my engineering kind of back, like that's kind of where I dove into first, right? And yeah.
And then finally, how would each of you like to be remembered? I think you guys are setting up for a bit of a something to remember you by, but what are you individually thinking about that? And this doesn't have to be as a designer, this is just as a person.
I think especially with, I don't know, yeah, it's less in design, but this definitely has something to do with it. I think I want to be maybe remembered by, like, I don't know, by my son or by my family as someone who's willing to take risks, even if looking dumb doing them. I think that's something like I've taken some really embarrassing steps in my life, and I've never regretted that, like, even though it was embarrassing. And I think like this could fall into that. I don't know, right? But yeah.
Well, it's so important. Like, you know, design's so much about failure. Like, most of it is. And I think, yeah, I agree. I think we both our sons are like the same age, and I have another one. But so I think in my personal life, I think it's about I'm aligned with that, right? Taking risks and them seeing me fail and them seeing me, not succeeding very often, right? I think, but from a design point of view, I think I've always, I like rebellious. I think that's probably what I would want to be known for. If not like a cool rebel, like, leather jacket, but I think just like, questioning systems, questioning, why do we do things just because that's the way they're done? And just kind of like bucking those things. I think a lot of what Okaterra was is saying, can we look at a system that's in place and kind of dismantle it? And what does it mean if we dismantle it? And as we put it back together, what do we learn? So I think that takes a little bit of a rebellious spirit to do that.
So the first question is, what does a day for you both look like? Do you guys have other jobs, or is your goal to grow Okaterra?
We have Common Object, which is our design studio. So most days we're doing product development most days, just more traditional product development. We were fortunate this year to focus a lot on Okaterra. Once we actually we launched this at ICFF in New York back in May. So once we knew we were going to do that, it was just like it was insane trying to get it done. So we knew that probably part time we were doing Okaterra, but yeah, most of the time we're doing all kind of work though. We do a lot of furniture, but we also just finished a medical device. We do the community work, right? So we work with them, we work with kids, and we, like right now we're designing a park for them, like different elements for the park. So we're working with a landscape architecture studio. So we're kind of everywhere.
Yeah, like I have the workshop, wood shop is in Baltimore, where we do a lot of the physical building, right? So a lot of prototyping happens there for all of our projects. But honestly, like we're remote. Like I'm in Baltimore,
Yep.
he's in Grand Rapids, and so this is a new world of like we can run a studio completely remotely, and so we spend a lot of time on the phone, like just
Zoom, phone.
talking. Like conversation is what brings out kind of a lot of these ideas, and so a lot of talking.
Yeah, but we do see each other fairly often, probably. Like he'll come in or I'll go over there. So.
So another question from Zoom is, how was it working at Steelcase? What was your role, and would you ever go back to working corporate?
That's a good one. I had a pretty positive view at Steelcase for the most part. I'd say like I was there for 6 years and I think Steelcase is one of those companies. They work with IDEO. Was like they owned IDEO for a while, if I remember right, and they would partner with them all the time. I think the Node chair had just come out, which was this really innovative like mobile seating for the classroom, and I was just so drawn to that. I think we both were, and so you get to go in, and it's a super design focus. Like they had a VP of design who had a lot of power, I would say, in the company, and still like very design led. So I think that as a young designer was really helpful in like developing those skills and seeing how that influence on a company can kind of change design and change design culture.
It's a bit of a boot camp. It's like there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. You hit the ground running there.
Yeah, but I think that it would take a lot to go back to corporate now, because I think once you start kind of developing and creating, I think there comes a time when we're like, okay, I just need some like consistency and some that kind of stuff. But at the moment, I have a really hard time seeing that unless like the specific thing comes up, right?
Don't you think also like you need to work corporate to know whether or not you want to do it or not, right?
Yeah.
Some people love it, and it's there's a lot of perks to it, especially during exploration. You have a lot, usually have a lot at your fingertips. But I think for us now, it's about expression. Like we're trying to, all of this common object need to have a point of view. We have to bring these things, and it's funny. I think a lot of people, they work on their aesthetics so much, and me and Justin, we shaped our values around like who we are as well, right? Like Common Object is who we are personally too. So yeah, but yeah, I think we both have said that if it was the right company, probably one day, not right now, but one day
Yeah.
we may go back.
You said it'd be harder for you.
It'd be harder for me.
Yeah.
I got my own opinion. No, I have a different point of view on corporate, but yeah.
Another Steelcase related question is, what is one thing they always seek to improve every year, whether it's sustainability or innovation, especially in their office environments?
Yeah, I think that's, so office industry, and we have some great other like office companies represented here, the OM. We were just talking about this today, right? Like trying to predict the future is something that I think often that is the hardest thing to do, and an office company it's a cutthroat industry, right? And so I think I'm trying to think through the question there, but Steelcase, they're always trying, like that's kind of their main driver is understanding their clients, where they're moving. And so that's like their high level, what they're always aiming for. But then I think they are always trying to push on sustainability too. Like I have conversations with some really close friends of mine there who every year they take these little steps forward and they describe it as turning a big ship, right? So I think that's something that I have a friend there who's been there for I think 25 years. And the way that the company shifted, he's often says, I'm not a visionary, but he's shifted this company in like incremental ways as he's gone over his 25 years there. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and I think the contract furniture industry as a whole, I mean, they're trying. I think they're trying to figure it out. It's just like you said, it's just hard to turn the ship once you're going in a direction. So.
And we have two more, I see. But the first one is, what is the price point on your products?
Oh, great question. Too much for us. So like we mentioned, part of this was finding the market for what we're doing here. So these two chairs, they're going to be priced like slightly above West Elm kind of furniture. So it's a higher end. It's not luxury. I mean, luxury to me maybe. But so they're about like $3,500 is kind of where they start. And we're working though to understand how do we get this into more economical, whether it's pulling different designs now. That's what we're looking at, is like the designs we had here were not based on price. They were based on showing materials and understanding cushioning. And now we're saying, oh, we understand where our cost points are. We can start to pull that back.
Well, and I guess a good note is that Okaterra is not for really, we'll sell some chairs, but the goal is really to get into furniture. Like we want to work with the furniture company because that's where the impact is, right? Like we're going to sell onesies, twosies, but once we start at scale, we build a stronger circular economy. We get to pull in more farmers. So that's what we're getting at. To be regenerative, you have to do it at scale, right? It's yes, we may make little impact, but what most of our focus is now is going back and saying, okay, what are the price points that people need to be at, and what are the price points that we need to figure out? So we're kind of right now we're redesigning, not these ones, these are fine, they'll sell, but we're redesigning like more cost-effective chairs right now.
Yeah, like we also realized that we did this supply chain work, right? Which is not design. Also not design is sales, which is really hard. Like as designers, I'm used to designing a product and then selling that idea to a company who they then say, oh, I could sell that to my end customer, right? As a designer, I'm not used to selling a product to you and convincing you to buy my product. So I think that's been a learning for us is we did all this work on the back end. Now to to really get this scaled and to get the price down, which means scale, we have to sell that part of it.
Yeah.
So we might be working with some brands who can't have those sale channels and can just sell it for us, and that will help us get our price down. But yeah, there's a lot of work to do on this. So.
Where do you see Okaterra in 5 years?
That's a good one.
You gotta let you go.
So we've had this talk a lot. There's like the dream part, and then there's the do we have it in us part. So we present this, right, and this is like we're kind of giving you a peek inside of it, but I think we've come across like some pretty big insights into the supply chain industry and actually how it could make a lot of impact. And although we love the whole supply chain, there are just little components that we could grow in that would really just bust things apart and really grow. So I think in 5 years, the dream would be to pull a lot of the stuff in house, still have the community work where it's like job training and things like that. But it would be nice to be a full have all our whole supply chain in house and be able to do it. We could also, once that comes in house, you know, it becomes even more cost effective. Because right now somebody has to take a hit, right? Like the cost has to go somewhere, and we're saying let's pass it on to the buyers, right? Because we're not going to compromise the people making it, right? The people learning this new skill, and we're not going to compromise the farmers, right? So it has to go somewhere. But I think if we could pull enough in house, then all of a sudden we're competing with other furniture manufacturers, except for we're actually regenerating the planet.
I think like along with that, you mentioned like some key elements. So for instance, like the waste wool was a big one that we found in there. And we think that like that, I think we would be okay if just one of these things takes off in some way, right? Like even if it is just that element of it, or you know, we have a vision of, I think, as course of designers, right? We want to like own our designs. Like I'd love to be designing this furniture and selling it, you know, and people loving it in that way and creating a beautiful brand out of that. And also like if that doesn't happen, if someone else says, hey, we could use this as a supplier, we'd be also like very happy with that because of the impact that we know it would create. So I think we're still in that phase of understanding where we fit, to be honest.
And we knew that early on. It's hard to remove ego from, like as a product designer, I want my design out there. And it's really hard. With Okaterra, we did have to kind of remove ego a little bit. Now, although we did design these, we very much said like we're open to, you know, if we go to a company and they're like, well, we don't like you guys as designers, we want to bring in our own guys. I think we're open to that because it's like you said, it's about impact.
How long did it take to find farmers and suppliers for Okaterra?
I think it's probably a good 8 months till we had like a solid person that we could say like, okay, that's our supplier, and then another 6 months of developing exactly like what we wanted, what we needed from them. So that was kind of our first hurdle. But then once we got one on, all of a sudden it was easier to talk to the next person. And that's kind of, we're developing the system around how we bring in farmers too. Like that's kind of part of what we know we need to do to scale.
And when you say also, it's like, I think what's kind of interesting about what we've done as well is like, it's not that far off of design. It was still kind of exploration, like even connecting with people.
But we see there are a lot of farmers out there who want to practice regenerative agriculture. It's often that they're not incentivized financially for that. So we think that by showing that will naturally kind of bring that out of the woodwork. That's our hope, at least.
We have questions back here.
Also a question,
Go ahead, come on up.
with the mic. textile from fibers, where can I get my hands on this stuff? So kind of related to that, I wanted to ask, do you guys have any insights on like the process of getting materials to people who can use them, especially materials that will go to waste? Because I know that there's such a cost involved with that, even though you wouldn't think. You think these things get, thrown out, disposed of, they
Yeah.
might as well be free, but then actually, getting them to people costs money.
It does. Yeah. And so I think that's been a big learning for us too. One of the for wool specifically, and it sounds like you've done a lot of research on this as well, or which is awesome. I think that like we mentioned, the wool industry in the U.S. is kind of like shot. It's like farmers a lot of them are just like either doing it themselves, spinning and like cleaning it, or they're spending enormous amounts of money to send it to a wool mill in Michigan, get it processed, get it shipped back, and they're investing, $5,000, which is a lot of money like if you're working on a farm, to just, it's held up for a year, sometimes a year and a half before you actually get this back. So that process is very difficult, and it's where we've found a mill who's actually working directly with our farmers to do that in the local area. So finding those regional pieces, but then the waste wool part, what we found is that it's all about knowing who, or the connection point, right? And we found that the shearers, so in every locale, there's never enough people shearing sheep, apparently. And so all the farmers, they hire one person to come around and shear their sheep.
They're like the most popular people in the farming industry. There's only one.
And so, and it's a really hard skill. Like it takes years and years of practice to develop. But they also then do a wool pool a lot of times. They used to. It's too cheap. The wool's too not valuable enough in a lot of places to actually do a wool pool anymore. So those people are the connector point between everybody, right? And so I think that's kind of, as when you're designing any system, it's finding those connectors. And if you look up a shearing person, you have a hard time getting a hold of them because they're so popular, but they will know exactly how to get it, and they can usually get it for you if you need to buy it in bulk in some way, right? But yeah, does that answer your question generally?
Yeah.
Or do you want to know like specifically, can I sell you some waste
No,
wool?
just in general, because I know that a lot of these resources go to waste specifically because it's so hard to get them to people that can use them.
Yeah, it is. I think that it's really sad, to be honest. Like, and to hear the farmers, like, they care about that wool. They worked so hard for it. And one of our farmers has 200 like bags, like garbage bags full of wool in their barn, and it's just sitting there. She's waiting for. She's like, I know somebody will want this someday, right? So if you need some, I know a person.
Might have to take you up on that.
Yeah, let me know.
I mean, there's also Fiber Shed though too, right?
Oh, yeah.
So they're which
What's
is
a
not
Fiber
far
Shed?
from you. Check out Fiber Shed.
I guess kind of on a related note, I was wondering, like, are there any newer materials or any other things that have come up that seem interesting, or if you were trying to design something to be more sustainable or regenerative, are there any materials that we should look at in general?
Yeah.
That's a good one. I would say look at more resources to materials, because I think whatever you're working on, you want that material to be the right one for that project. So what we've been doing as a studio now is like we said, we're finding all those connection points. So we're working with places that are a little more untraditional, but we're on top of the material, right? And saying like, okay, this is up and coming. We think it might be something interesting that's gonna really take off. So we can kind of look at that and then find an application for it, what makes sense. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really cool materials. It's just, I think it's more, for us, it's probably more project based. Like, what are we trying to accomplish? And then what materials, but yeah, I mean.
Yeah, it feels like a lot, there's a lot of buzz around, I don't know, like, let's say apple-based, like an apple leather, right? or cactus leather. Like there's so many materials out there, or mycelium,
Yeah, we see that's really big right
like a mycelium, a grown block or a lamp. And I think a lot of it is you can kind of look up all these pieces and try to understand them. But a lot of times it's understanding the scale too, right? So like,
Yeah.
is it Ecovative? Is like they're a big mycelium company, right? And they're doing a lot. They started off with like packaging, but now they're moving into a lot of other things that are really interesting that you could follow. There's, we love this NFW company. They're really focused on scaling in a way that's hopefully going to be cost effective. A lot of materials are beautiful and we love them, but it's really hard to get your hands on them, and that's kind of a challenge, I think. Like,
Yeah.
especially in interiors, right? Like, or in any
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but mycelium's a good one because that one, I think the focus is a lot in architecture right now and materials for that. But then, yeah, we've been talking to somebody about a project maybe around that.
Yeah. It's hard though.
Yeah.
I think also like I would encourage everybody. Materials are sexy, and we love finding these cool materials that work well or that have a story to them. And I think it's weird. I'm like going back to really traditional materials though, like as
Yeah.
I kind of get into this. But it's not that other materials is like that you shouldn't be understanding it or looking into it. I think it's really important. I think that's really the future of design is in material research. And I would just maybe encourage you to like have that be part of your practice, right? Of looking for that and trying to understand it deeper.
Yeah, there's so many, it's like a race, right? There's so many that are being developed. And that's like for us too, when we go look, it's like who can we bet on,
Yeah.
right? Like so there's some like even stuff we're talking about that's kind of like what would you call it? It's taking like waste wood, like old stuff that would usually be thrown out or it's garbage, and they're turning it into more solid and it's like kind of molded process. There's just so many really cool things. But yeah, I think just think of your application. I mean, use the sites like Material Connection. That's a really good one that they're always on top of like the new stuff. There's M4 Factory, which is interesting. They're out of Chicago. So yeah, I think it's more like it's putting your finger on the pulse of like who's on top of the materials.
Yeah. And I would say also a big thing, if your concern is sustainability, which like a lot of these materials are developed around that, I think it's about understanding what type of sustainability are you talking about? Because like we're talking about completely bio-based and
Yeah.
decomposable, right? So a lot of times you look at like an apple leather, and it sounds great, but then you realize, oh well, actually this is like, I don't know the numbers, so don't quote me.
It's pretty high.
60% plastic, right? As part of this, like, yeah, there's a great story that you could tell, but if you're trying to tell a plastic-free story, you
Yeah.
don't use that, right?
Which we're not anti-plastic. I mean, we're just
right, yeah. If you want
for
to tell,
Okaterra, it had to be bio-based.
yeah, like we're working with once you get into like the weeds of recycling, and you realize like, oh, a lot of times plastics can't be, like this chair here would be almost impossible to make out of fully recycled plastic, right? But there's some other processes that you can use. There's one that I've started looking into. It's not necessarily a new one, but it's called structural foam, and it's essentially like a thicker version. It uses different processes. It's not as pretty, but you can use 100% recycled plastic in that, like that's from post-consumer. And so like if you would start with that as your basis for your development, all of a sudden you're using 100% recycled, and which is something really hard to do in the plastics industry.
Which goes back to like what we're saying, right? We're taking, so right now we're looking at that for to foolishly go back and do this again. We're looking at that, but we're seeing that as more of a play probably for companies. So we're gonna develop in-house, but we're starting once again with the material and with looking at a few partners and saying like, hey, if we put that together, can we do something with that?
I kind of just stopped. I kind of just stopped into the class because I wanted to sit in, and I have some friends here in the class. And this presentation was honestly really just motivating to me because I was recently talking to an alumni from this program who was telling me about some of the things that have been on her radar in terms of sustainable materials, but maybe like some manufacturers being, on her end at least in a consultancy setting, kind of like wary about taking on these sustainable materials because they can't be mass produced yet, which is kind of a really big issue, that we deal with here in the field of design. And something I was wondering just now is, has it ever maybe been a concern to both of you about the length of maybe like a product cycle, if you will, for your products, or I guess maybe in your journey and trying to actually seek out these materials and really like get to the core of like, okay, we're trying to use every single aspect of this material, and then later we can like worry about like how long it'll take to make these things. Yeah.
Are you asking about like when you mentioned like the life of the product, like how long the product itself will last? Or are you asking about how long it takes to develop the product?
More about the product development cycle, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like that's a scary conversation we have with our clients sometimes, because it does take more time. Like we're talking about like adding a thing at the beginning of your product development cycle, right? Which is like it's a scary thing, I think, to pull into it. But I think that our hope is that we can get better and better at it, to make that kind of, to shrink that a little bit. But I think our goal would be that it's something that you can do once, and then that's an investment, and it's also a huge advantage. You can tell stories like our story here is really easy to tell. People see it, and like you just tell them, like we're working with farmers, like it's all bio-based, and from a sustainability side, people like can really get that and understand it. And the same with like these other investments that do take a lot of investment up front. Our belief is that we're storytellers as designers, and especially around sustainability, you need to be able to tell a story that's unique to add that value to the client. Like we're still in a capitalist society, right? Like that's where we are, and it's we have to create things that add more value to the product, to specific users. Like it might not be everybody that adds value to it. So anyways, I think that's more of like my thought around it, is that it's an investment. It does take more time, and it's going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think also we're seeing a road of, is it also just they hire us to kind of instigate change as we go in, right? Like I think they're gonna have to want, if somebody's gonna hire us, they're gonna have to want for us to kind of rethink a system within how they do things already. Really, what we do now is it's not that different, but it's just a smaller increment, right? It's helping a company say like, all right, let's just evaluate how we could be more sustainable. It could be something as simple as like, hey, we're looking at this fabric. Can it be done in this, or it could be something like I said in the back room, like how much waste is there? Is there a way we could do this where we create less waste? I mean, it can even be end of life, right? Designing for disassembly. So I think that's why we have those learnings at the end, because although this is so specific, right? So specific, but those learnings can kind of be taken and kind of applied to we think big companies as well.
It's a great question. It's what a lot of people question when they see this, right? It's good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I actually had a kind of a follow-up question that's actually about your were to take Okaterra to a much larger scale, would you want to grow within that region, or would you like find other regions and create like nodes of Okaterra that are slightly different, or
So
would
you-
you just license it out, or any and all?
I mean, you figured out the plan, right? That's exactly what we're doing. We're right now you know, some of ICFF was us talking to people from different regions. Who can the partners be? And really that like much like Fiber Shed, right? These regional networks. I mean, that's kind of the plan for Okaterra. So we're already talking and figuring out like in for the Midwest, like more like Michigan area, just because there's so much industry there already. It's kind of easy to grow that next. But then we're actually looking here a little more north. But yeah, when we talk now that we're here, we're like, who could we visit in LA? That's like that may be interesting. But yeah,
There's a lot of farms about 40 miles north of here.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah.
but we would need the whole network, right? It's also like, you know, who's doing interesting things in the community and with manufacturing and who's looking for growth as well. Like lots of times with this, you know, you have to look for somebody who's looking for the next step.
Yeah, but that's I think this was a McKinsey article, some like big consulting group. Like they're really predicting this rise of kind of micro factories and like hyper regional supply chains, or we call them like compact supply chains, right?
Yeah.
And so I think our vision would be, maybe that's that 5-year question that was asked on Zoom. Our vision would be that we have, you know, one of these in like, you know, 5 big cities around the U.S.
Yeah.
like as a hub for this, and maybe elsewhere. But like that would be our goal would be to kind of grow it in that way, and we think that's the only way to keep the story pure, or
Yeah.
that we want, which is a very like purist story
Sorry.
that we know like won't work for everybody, but yeah, it's an experiment, and I think that would be like an awesome way to do that for sure.
And I think it's like we're you know, we're being validated, and you know, we talk to some pretty large companies, and they're kind of in the same boat. They're questioning, all right, we have these huge manufacturing plants. What happens if we start to have these little satellite plants? They're questioning what's the future of their supply chain,
Yeah.
and the fact that we're kind of moving in one of the directions they're thinking about. I mean, I think, you know,
I think, yeah, and I think it's really exciting with working on bio-based stuff, because I like to imagine like, what does a Long Beach chair look like? Like, what's the things here, right, that you have a lot of? I've even like, don't even think about the bio-based side. Like, what are there recycled things that are really prevalent here, or things that are around us that are the materials here? I think there's something really interesting about using that as a criteria and kind of seeing how it grows. I don't know. It's a
Yeah.
fun, exciting thing to kind of ponder.
and it's what we deal with, right, as designers. It's guardrails. That's all it is. I mean, it's just another guardrail.
Thank you so much for that. That was very inspiring. It's just very, very cool. Easy question to start. How did you stain the wood in a sustainable way?
Yeah, it's great. So we use linseed oil, which is a bug, right? It's I don't know what some beetle, not totally sure.
We're not that knowledgeable.
But it's
just know.
yeah. So it's fully bio-based, but it takes a lot longer to cure. Is kind of the thing. So where a typical stain, you could flash it off really quickly. This is like, you know, to really let it sit is like two weeks, right? So it's a long process. There's other ones like Rubio Monocoat, which is linseed oil but has an accelerator in it, and it speeds it up. They don't tell you what's in the accelerator, so that's the only thing that it apparently flashes off, and it is all bio-based after that. So that's the things that we have to question, like, are we willing to take that leap there, like to go to that we don't quite know what's in it, and they're not going to tell us, right? Like, we're just a quote-unquote furniture company. But Yeah, great
But-
question.
I think we're also pushing into that a little more. We're trying to figure out like what are different ways? We don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what's fun about this as well, right? It's like there's always something to explore. So we're even trying to figure out how to do like interesting colors, you know.
There's an indigo
Yeah.
farm in Baltimore and
Yep.
an indigo dyeing plant, and so we're partnering with them to see like, hey, what does that do? It will fade over time, but is that part of our story, right? That indigo is just a stain on the wood. That's an interesting element.
Yeah.
You guys see the whey stain?
Oh, what is it?
Whey.
Oh no.
It's, there's a Vermont company that uses whey as part of their finishing
Oh,
to
wow.
mat.
Like a milk. Is it kind of like
Yeah.
a milk stain? I've heard of milk stain.
I use it
but-
on my deck.
Oh, really?
And
Wow.
it's amazing.
Okay, we'll have to look at that.
Yeah. We'll write that
Sorry,
down.
I just wanted to interject.
No, please help us out.
Send us all your ideas.
That's everyone's homework.
So one of the things that was really interesting that you guys said, among many, but was that you could look at wood and the object itself could be either very sustainable or very not sustainable. Or you could look at wool, like you said, and it could be sustainable or not sustainable. And so I think it's a really interesting kind of thought. And then you have the picture of like the sheep, they're merino wool and it's monocultured or whatever what we call that. And I think it's interesting because I look at that design, right, and it's a beautiful piece. And I think to myself, well, that could be done, mass produced, exactly like that, with no thought for sustainability, right?
Yeah.
So my question kind of is, and you kind of touched on a little bit about how you guys aren't like marketing in a way, or you're not selling in a way, right? But I think to myself, like, I'll go to Sprouts and buy eggs, and it's like $9, right? But you go to Albertsons and get them for like $2, right? And they have cheaper ones at Sprouts too. But there's something about the brand that you're investing in, and then you're investing in so much more than just the object. It's in either your health or it's in the planet or whatever it is. So it seems to me that you have to attach yourself to the brand to then want to fork over twice the price for an object that you look at and not know necessarily. You made a couple comments about natural deformities, I think is what you said. But I was just thinking about that, like how would you kind of overcome that in a way where someone would have to again attach themselves to that idea to then say, yeah, I'm all in and I'm going to invest more money than I would really need to be a part of that journey. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's
a good one too.
something we wrestle with because I think if we said we're not sales or even like marketing, but I think the natural thing for me to think about is experience because like that's where we're good at, right? As product designers. So I think of like we've talked about what are other things that we can attach to this? Like is there a booklet that goes when you get this chair? Like I'm thinking about like an Apple product. It feels different or did. I think that people are getting better now, right? But that experience of unboxing and feeling like I'm part of something that's different, right?
Yeah.
So I think we've talked about like, is there a booklet that goes with it that explains each element of this
When
chair?
your tree fell,
Right,
what
right.
your sheep's name was. You know.
Yeah, someone told us like this sounds like a Portlandia sketch, and we're like, I mean, maybe. So, but yeah, I think that's where we do feel like it's important to be a brand. We don't think our brand's there yet, just to be completely frank.
Yeah.
We,
Well, that focus is also, like we're saying, we have to, if we're connected with farmers, we have to support them, right? That we're trying to help build that circular economy and support these farmers. So the focus is like, what are the numbers we could do? Like Okaterra could grow slowly, right? We could invest right now into marketing and we could get that story out. But also we could take this story and hand it to somebody who has that sales channel and then they're able to tell it. They're selling the same thing. So they get our story and we get a client essentially. So that's kind of how we're approaching it right now. Because they could tell that story probably a little better than we can. But it's all about where you want to put your resources, right? Like I think that's the big thing.
Yeah. I guess I just think about the existing brands out there already come with a lot of baggage on what they already sell.
that's a good point.
And how they've already been talking in the market for years.
Right.
That a fresh brand kind of with a story that's because there's so much integrity
Yeah.
in what you guys did that there's a fun phrase, greenwashing, right? And oh my goodness, like it's everywhere, right? And the story of sustainability has just been so faked by so many companies. But you guys started out with so much integrity in your criteria that informed the result in such a way that really no other company could probably do, even if you're handing it over to them in a way. So yeah, and I love even when you said too, you're like, and we haven't picked up a pen yet. Like you haven't even gotten to the design part or the aesthetic part of it, and you had all these criteria. And so I guess just make a comment at the end, and I'll go sit down. Sorry, Max. Was that when I first heard of this project, in Econ, you guys shared it with me, and you made a funny comment. You said it was kind of like a senior thesis gone wild, because you're already professionals and you have all the experience, but now we're just going to take it in the studio and kind of go for it. And I was excited to see it and see it in depth like this, because I feel like this was very inspirational for what is even possible for these students. And even at the end, when you said, what is a Long Beach version of this? I mean, that's so inspiring to think about what's along the coast or what this climate has or whatever. So thank you for coming all the way out here and presenting. And I was super inspired, and I haven't been in school for a long time, but yeah, so thank you very much. It's really cool.
Thanks.
That was amazingly inspiring, and we appreciate you coming out, sharing Okaterra, sharing your story, and the process of getting there was incredible to kind of watch. Not only the unfolding, but the digging. And I think that's a thing that a lot of times designers don't always think about. It's more the exploring of the visual and the outcome rather than what the ingoing is. So, I have one quick thing. You both mentioned you teach. Where do you teach?
Oh yeah. I teach adjunct at MICA College. It's Maryland, Baltimore based. Yeah, it just started this year actually. So I teach. It's really it's an easy one. It's materials, so it's like a really fun one.
Welcome to the rabbit hole.
Yeah, thank you.
So I've taught 5 years virtual at a school called Ivy Tech. It's probably the biggest 2-year network. And I teach a few classes there, materials being one of them. A studio either. I teach a few classes there. I really love it. As we talked about, there's something about also just the community aspect of it and the untraditional students that come through there. That's just really gives me a lot of life as I am able to kind of provide education for them. And then I teach also at Kendall College in Grand Rapids,
Which is where we went.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So.
Thank you both very much.
Thanks for having me. Like, we are available. I'd like to offer that as far as like reaching out to whatever. Feel free. Something that we really enjoy doing, and yeah.
Maybe taking you up. I also teach the senior studio in the spring, so maybe.
Yeah. That'd be great.
Out to you guys.
Yeah, in any way, or if you have like wool connections here or anything like that.
Yeah.
just know.
We'll trade you.